This week, we're going to take this bare block that's looking pretty plain and boring to looking like this. Welcome to Notorious Autosports, where today we're assembling the 302 short block.
Yeah.
We have parts scattered all over. We've got a bare block prepped, cleaned, ready to go to get some of these parts put in there today. Gonna try and get it actually put together into a short block. So we're gonna have pistons, bearings, and camshaft all put in, lifters, oil pump, and try and get it so that it can at least be ready to do the top end. We'll get together on that here in the near future, do some cylinder head work, and then try and get this thing done in a couple more episodes actually. I'm trying to go as in depth for you guys as I can without dragging it out too far, but I do want to try and give you as much information as possible. So today we've got all our pistons cleaned up. I showed you last time how to clean all in these ring grooves and get them all tidied up. What I've done on these piston rings, piston pins, is I've actually gone through and sprayed a bit of WD-40 in here and here. You can also spray oil in there. The WD-40 just gets in there easier, and this allows that pin to move back and forth freely and back and forth that way as well. They were kind of tight just from sitting, oil deposits. You send them through the parts washer, you get rid of any kind of oil deposits that were in there or oil that was in there so they can get dried out. So just go through, clean them up. Good idea when you're assembling them to put a bit of actual engine oil in there. And I'm actually going to spray all the rods down as well with some WD-40 just so they've got some coating, because I don't know how long this car's or engine's going to be sitting before it goes in a car, and we don't want any extra rust developing on them due to moisture. I'm going to do the same thing with the main caps as well. What we're going to do is get the crankshaft in there, go through getting bearings in there, measuring oil clearance as well. I have gone through and already done all that, but I will show you guys how to do one of the main journals there, and also do the same thing with the connecting rods as well for the pistons. I've already gone through and checked all that as well, but it's a good practice just to go through, even when using standard bearings, which we have here, and they are even stamped standard. I don't know if you can see that, but they are stamped standard. It is still a good practice just to verify. Manufacturing tolerances could be different. Something could have got misstamped even. You never know. So it's good just to do your due diligence. You don't want to go to all the effort assembling that thing and then something's too tight and you burn up the bottom end on it, or spin a bearing, or just have a catastrophic failure. So we'll get into that right now. I'll show you guys how to plasti gauge. So plasti gauge, we want to measure the amount of clearance in the bearings in the block versus where the crankshaft is and this cap mounted on the engine. So we've got two different bearings. We've got the ones that go in our cap, and we've got the ones that go in our block. And if you look in there, you can see a couple differences. This one is smooth inside. This one has a groove for the oil in it, and also an oil feed hole. In the block here, we have two oil feed holes. Do not install this one in the block. You will not get oil. You will burn the bottom end out. So what we do, and also these have little tangs on them. This has a little tang in the block. So just pay attention and it'll go right in. It's not too bad. So in order to measure the clearance, we have plasti gauge, which is this real thin string, and it's almost like rubber or plastic. What we're going to do is cut a section of it off. We're going to put it in there. We're going to put the cap on with the bearing. We're going to tighten it down, and we've got this gauge on the actual paper. When we tighten that down, it's going to squish this down, and we want to match it up with this. The spec for the 302 is 0.004 to 0.00015, I believe. Yes, 0.0004 to 0.0015. I went through all of this and we averaged 0.002. So we're good that way. No problems there. I had one that measured 0.003. So everything's in spec there. We're going to put it all in. I've got assembly lube on all of these just to keep everything nice. I've gone through, I've cleaned the crank again. I've gone through and I've also rinsed down the block, the bores, everything underneath, brake cleaned, and got this as clean as I possibly can to get it ready for final assembly here. So we're going to go through, make sure we don't have anything on our bearing. The cap is the same way, has a little notch in it to receive the bearing. And pop this bearing in, and then I'm gonna just put a little bit of oil on the threads of these bolts to make sure that you don't have any kind of drag when you go to tighten them down. Ensures getting a proper torque. I'm gonna seat that cap as best as I can, just so it goes on nice and straight. And then these get torqued as per the service manual to 60 to 70 foot-pounds. So we're going to do 65. So that is your procedure there. Now what we want to do is that exact process with the plastic gauge in there, and that's going to measure what your oil clearance is. So we'll take it back apart there, insert that plastic gauge just on the top side, and then we'll be able to measure what our spec is. We're just going to wipe our surface clean here. Take a piece of plasti gauge. You can go about 2/3 the width of the bearing surface. And then drop it. And then try and figure out where you dropped it. So we're going to go and just cut a new piece there. And we'll find that later. Now what I'm going to do is lay it across the top there. Take our cap, do the same as we did before. And we are going to torque this back up. One thing to be very mindful of when you've got that plastic gauge in there, don't rotate the crankshaft back and forth, because you're actually going to distort that and it'll completely throw off your reading and you'll have to do it all over again. you also have to be kind of careful when removing the cap to ensure the same kind of thing. So you can actually see that we've got an imprint on the cap as well. And we've got an imprint on the crankshaft. So we're going to go through and match it up to what we've got here. And we've got a nice 0.002. Alright, so we got this cap here. I'll bring it up so you guys can try and see too. And we basically got the same width on the bearing as we do on that solid green line, which is a 0.002. So we are in spec. So now to remove this stuff, a little bit of brake clean on a rag, and it just kind of melts right off. Nice and easy. Nothing to worry about. So we'll wipe it off the crankshaft. I will then remove the crankshaft, find out where that last little piece went, because I don't want it going anywhere that it's not intended. It could just be sitting in the area for the rear main seal, but we'll get that sorted. I will clean that bearing surface, get some assembly lube on it as well, and then we'll actually put assembly lube on all the bearings that are in all the caps, put them in, install them, and torque them down as well. Alright, so we've got all of them except number 3 assembled. There's something a little bit different about it. If you notice this bearing, it actually has sides on it, and this one is actually a thrust bearing. So it's actually going to fit down here in the crankshaft, and you can see there's walls on the side of the crankshaft on this one. This bearing is actually going to control movement front to back of the crankshaft, which is called thrust. So this is actually called a thrust bearing. And one thing also to note, Ford makes it really, really easy. Not only are these caps numbered 1 to 5, but they also have an arrow to the front of the engine. So it's pretty hard to mess them up. Pay attention when you're taking them apart. You'll notice these kind of things. Put it back together the same way. But you don't even need to keep it in order once you've taken it apart. Send it through your parts washer, mix it all up. It's not a big deal. They have numbers, so you'll know where to put them back. All the main cap bolts are the same with the exception of this one stud on number 3, which is for your oil pump pickup. So other than that, everything's pretty straightforward. We're going to get this bearing put in. Again, line up your tabs. Get it set in there. Do a little bit of assembly lube. And on this one, I'm going to put a little bit extra because I actually want to bring it around to the sides of the bearing as well. And once we get this all assembled, I'm going to actually go and measure the thrust clearance on this, which is the forward and backward movement of the crankshaft, just to make sure that we're still in spec. There shouldn't be any issues. I've never had a problem in the past, but we just want to make sure that for some reason nothing's worn on the crankshaft that's going to cause us to have a problem. We'll go ahead and we'll torque these all down. As I said, the torque is 60 to 70, so we'll go right in the middle. We're doing 65. It'd be really nice if they had engine stands with locking wheels. I'm sure they do. I need a couple of those because you got to try and keep this thing from sliding all over the floor as you're trying to tighten stuff. It's always a pain. Oh, and by the way, that plastic gauge I dropped, sure enough, it was right back where I thought it was at the clearance area for the rear main seal. Got that out of there, no problems. So we've got a magnetic base dial indicator set up here. And what this is going to do is measure our forward to backward thrust movement on the crankshaft. So I've got this set up, and basically, if I put my screwdriver in here, get you guys in a little closer, we've got that gauge at 0. And if I go to the other side here, and I push the other way, we read 7. Spec is 0.004 to 0.008, so we are right in spec. No problems there at all. You can also set it up on the front side. It's just a lot easier because on the back side here, you've got the large surface of the crankshaft to actually go on. There are other bases as well for the dial indicators. You've got other setups like vice grips with these kind of snakes that tighten up. A little harder to use than a magnetic base when you've got a nice flat surface. You can get these fairly cheap. The indicator on here is not a cheap one, neither is that vice grip clamping setup. The magnetic base I just got from the Canadian equivalent of Harbor Freight, which is Princess Auto. So you can get that pretty economically. I think it was like $13 or $20 or something. Works perfect for this. It's got a little flip switch to turn on and off the magnet. You set it up. It's got these little dials that let you raise and lower it and twist it, and works great. So we're right in spec there. Now we get to put some pistons in. Pistons. We have our rings and we have our bearings. And speaking of bearings, I meant to show you guys earlier. These are the bearings we pulled out of the engine. And signs from disassembly showed that that engine might not have had the best oil change intervals or care. And that's an old rod bearing, and you can see the discoloration. It's supposed to be silver, like the bearings that we just put in. And that's one of our crank bearings or main bearings. And it's already gone through the first layer into the second layer, and yeah, it's not looking so good. So that's either gotten hot or starved of oil, or not exactly sure what the history was. Luckily the deck surface was still flat. I don't have the cylinder heads from that, so the heads that I got, I know, weren't overheated, so I don't have to worry about that. But there's lots of signs of oil deposits on everything, so it doesn't look like it had the best maintenance, but that's why it's getting refreshed. So we've got our new bearings to go in here. We've got ACL bearings. These are standard again. We don't have any sizes that we needed to have machined on the crankshaft, so we're able to go with the standard sizing. We'll open these up. Just be mindful when you are opening them of the actual bearing surface to not drag your knife across them. These are a little different from the crankshaft bearings, as they are the same top and bottom. They still have the tab and they have an oiling hole, but it's, as I said, the same top and bottom. So we're all right that way. You don't have to worry about putting them in wrong. Just make sure you get them lined up with the tab. First, we're going to do our rings though. So we'll set those aside. Make sure not to drop them on the floor. And I just wanted to give a shout out too. There's a lot of places online that you can buy these engine kits, parts, bearings. You can piece it together. You can buy a whole package. There's a lot of different options these days, but The engine shops are getting few and farther between. These guys have been in it for a lot of years, and there's a lot of knowledge. So we need to keep buying from these guys so that they can keep staying around. Not all these engines need to be machined, so they're still doing a lot of machine work, but on these ones that you're building yourself, you're not necessarily keeping them in business on the machine shop side, so giving them the business on the front side over the parts counter is going to keep them going. So all of these parts were purchased through Clay's Auto Parts and Machine in San Antonio, Texas. These guys are absolutely amazing. The other benefit you get from buying from a small shop like this is these guys are going to give you information along the way. If you have a question during your build, pick up the phone and ask them, because they've done it countless times. If you run into trouble, chances are they know exactly what you're doing wrong or where you're at and how to correct. You don't get that buying over the internet. So you may pay a little bit more, but the service you're going to get at the end of the day is worth a lot more. I've got Felpro engine gaskets here. We've got ACL premium bearings. We've got a Melling oil pump, checkered flag performance piston ring compressor made in the USA, and we've got an Engine Pro timing chain here. There is a couple things to be mindful of on the rings, and again, this was a benefit of buying from a shop, is there are two different piston ring potentials on these engines. So you've got deep groove and narrow groove. So they made a point of getting me to buy both, and piston rings are not expensive. So if you're local to where you're buying, you can just take them back if they're unopened. Or chances are, if they're all there, they might even take them back. I recently got a little bit of a collection of parts and ended up with yet another set of piston rings. However, they are the incorrect ones. So I now have two sets of deep groove rings that are incorrect, but I will show you guys what is wrong with these. So here is an example of a deep groove ring for the second groove. It doesn't fit. Here is the top ring. Again, it doesn't fit. We've got our narrow groove, drops right in. And number two, again, drops right in. When you are test fitting these, take your ring, drop it in, and you don't want to see any ring protruding from the edge of the ring groove, because this has to be able to compress down enough, and if it gets too hot, it needs to be able to expand, and if it can't expand enough or compress enough, you're going to run into issues. Something else to keep in mind, and it varies from manufacturers and also from engine to engine. Ring number one, it doesn't matter if it goes like that or like that. Ring number two, it most definitely does. So on these ones, and this is going to be really, really hard to see, guys, but right there, at the end of my finger, there is a dot, and that needs to point up. On these Hastings rings, number two, I don't know if you can see that, but it actually says top. And it's going to be really hard to see, but right now, on the bottom inner edge of that ring, and you might not even be able to see it on camera, but it actually has a chamfer. And that ring needs to go on in a proper orientation in order for you to have proper compression. So we're going to set these aside, and we're going to go over how to install these rings correctly, because it definitely matters. If you set them up wrong, line things up incorrectly, you're going to have zero compression, you're going to chew through a bunch of oil, and you're going to have a really, really bad time. Alright, so we've got our piston rings all out of the package here, and you'll notice they're all labeled 1, 2, And 3. We've got our oil rings on the bottom here. We've got our oil control rings and our wafer spring that goes in between them. Something I would highly recommend. Once you've opened the package, go through all your envelopes. Count how many you have. Make sure you have enough to do however many pistons are in your engine. In this case, 8. So we have 16 of these, 8 of these, 8 of number 1, and 8 of number 2. If you don't, somebody's opened that package, or it's been manufactured and packaged incorrectly, take it back, get a new one. It's gonna suck if you don't measure or don't count. You get to the last piston and you don't have enough. You're gonna be real upset. So what we're gonna do is we are going to take one of our pistons. We're gonna take our wafer spring and we are going to roll it on here gently. Don't try and distort it too much or tweak it. And basically we're going to take our opening and line it up at 12 o'clock. We're going to take our opening of our top ring and line it up around 2 o'clock. We're going to take the opening of our bottom ring and line it up around 10 o'clock. You don't want these all lined up because if they do, then oil's just going to go right past it. In the same thing with our compression rings, we are going to line them up at the opposite down at the bottom. And that way, these are never going to line up. These rings actually rotate. As the piston goes up and down, the rings are rotating. If you offset them correctly, they're never going to line back up because they're always going to be rotating the same amount. And you're not going to run into any issues of loss of compression or oil blow by or anything like that. So we're going to install these ones by hand. The compression rings we're going to install with the tool. They are a lot thicker and you risk a chance of breaking them like I did on the disassembly. Just take your time. Don't be in a rush because you don't want to have to go and buy more. And how I found it the easiest, install the wafer spring in the center, install the top oil ring, and then install the bottom. Then we're going to go through, we're going to install number 2. So we're working backwards, but that is definitely the easiest because if you start at number 1, then you've got to try and get all the other rings over top of them. So we've got our lineup there. I am going to rotate that oil ring further out as it rotated when I installed it. Make sure we've got our dot pointing to the top. And we've got our ring spreading tool. We're going to try and just get it on nice and level, not distort it. These can be a little finicky. Again, just take your time. It's going to drop into the wrong groove there. You might have to try this a couple times. Alright, there we are. And make sure we offset it. And again, you can install all these and offset them afterwards. It's not that big of a deal. The harder thing is just to see the bottom ones because they are so fine. Your compression rings, get out of there. Not a big deal. As you can see, it's got quite a large opening. There we are. There's one piston done. 7 more to go. We're going to get through that, spray these rods down, install some bearings. Again, same setup as before. These ones have the little notch out of them. Make sure you get that in there. Install some assembly lube, and then we're going to go over how to install them in the cylinders without scratching the cylinders with these nice threads on your bolts, because you definitely don't want to do that after you spend all that time honing the cylinders. Alright, so that gives you a bit of an indication of the amount of time that goes into just cleaning and getting things ready for assembly and then assembling. So when you call an engine shop and you get a price for the build, and keep in mind, everything I've shown you so far is just the bottom end of the engine, and we haven't even really assembled much. There's only a crankshaft in that block, but gone through and cleaned everything. We've got these pistons ready to go in, rings on, bearings in. But when you get a price, like, keep in mind that there's a lot of time that goes into preparations and assembly and getting things cleaned. And when something goes wrong, you're going to want that guy to stand behind it too. So he doesn't want anything to go wrong. So when he's building your engine, he's going to take extra time, extra care. At least the reputable machine shops and assemblers are going to take that extra time and do a really good job to make sure that you aren't going to have a problem going forward. So just even right there, you see me going through, putting rings on and putting bearings in and wiping everything down. Gives you just a quick indication of just some of the little things that you don't think about, but they are time consuming. So we are close to getting those in there and making it look that much closer to actually being a short block. It's the next day. It got late. Let's knock some pistons in. Alright, time for some pistons. So we've got our piston ring compressors. There's a couple different designs. And we've got those piston rings that we put on. As you can see, they're larger than the piston. That's what causes them to seal against the cylinder walls. So I've got this nice solid one that I have never actually gotten to use before. I've always used this adjustable style before. They're pretty universal, but they are cheap and they are finicky. So you've got this tool, you just stick it in the top and it just kind of ratchets and winds down, and then it's got a quick release. But the thing I find is you get a lot of movement. So when you're trying to get it flat on the top of the block, you run into a lot of issues just trying to get it perfect to get it to start, and the oil rings slip out a little bit and then they catch on the deck surface and they're just finicky. So I'm excited to try this out. The only thing with this is you're set with one size. So this is gonna do a 4-inch bore. So 302 Ford, 305 Chevy, You've got 318 Dodge. So those are some of your common engines that use a 4.00 bore size. But I figured for the ease of installation, I really wanted to try it. So we'll set that one aside because I don't want to try that today. What I've gone through is I've just basically taken some engine oil, wiped all this down around here, gone through, put some on the pin as well, and sprayed down these rods just to give them a bit of coating for corrosion prevention. Wiped the cylinders down with engine oil as well, and I find the easiest way to prevent any kind of damage of the cylinder walls is to have your bores vertical. So on a V-style engine, just rotate it so that it's straight up and down. Because if you're going in on a V, you're going to slide that piston in like that. That rod is going to want to hit the side of your cylinders. If you're going down like that, a lot less chance of damaging anything. One more thing that makes life easy, and I've never actually gotten to use them before. I've always seen them. I've always wanted to get them. Is these silicone or rubber type rod bolt protectors. They just slide over the end there. These ones are Cleveite, which is Male. Part number is 2800-B1. They come as a pair. You can buy them from Summit Racing. I checked last night. They're $110 for two. You can get them on Amazon for $25. Or you can get them at O'Reilly for $1.99. So O'Reilly Auto Parts for the win there. And this just makes sure that when they're going down, the threads aren't going to scratch your crankshaft. Keeps things pretty safe. So we're going to set this over. We're going to get this centered up. I've made sure that my ring end gaps are where they need to be in orientation for not having any overlap. We're going to basically eyeball getting this lined up. Try and get our skirt in where it needs to be. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can take the wooden handle of a hammer and kind of knock this down. There are hammers for pistons that are actually kind of a dead blow, and they have a longer end on them. So that when you're swinging that way, you're not getting in proximity with your handle. But sometimes you can get lucky and actually just press these down. Get them nice and flush, and then we are good there. Also, one thing that makes life easy is rotating the crank and making sure that the actual throw of the crank is in line with the bore, so you're not trying to get that rod off-centered. And then things go down, they're nice and even, and it just drops straight on. One thing I forgot to mention yesterday, so earlier on in the video, after you've got your main caps on, you've got your assembly lube on there and all of that as well, is to make sure that your crankshaft rotates nice and freely. Speaking of assembly lube, I skipped a step, and I'm going to want to actually press that piston back out and add assembly lube to that bearing. Got ahead of myself. Got all our pistons in, connecting rod caps torqued to 22 foot-pounds. I must say, if you're doing this, go ahead and get yourself a Haynes manual or something similar. It's going to have all your torque specs in there. I'm going to give you as much information as I can on assembly here, but this is going to give you how to on disassembly and assembly, checking, measuring, all of those things in between, and it's worth so much more than what you're going to pay in monetary value. So go out, grab yourself something like this. There's a couple other variations. It might be a Climber, might be another brand. I can't quite remember, but these have been around forever. So we got everything torqued. What we want to do afterwards is make sure that everything rotates nice and freely, and it does. A couple revolutions. We got no drag there. Everything's nice and happy. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to spray the bottom of this block with a bit of WD-40. As I said, just to keep any flash rust from developing, as I don't have all of it completely coated, and I don't know when I'm going to get the oil pan on this, when it's going to have oil in it, how long it's going to be sitting in storage before it actually goes into a vehicle. So give that a coat, and then we're going to spin it around, put some lifters in, and then we're going to be that much closer to a complete short block. By the way, I know I keep saying short block. What is referred to as a short block? A short block is an engine minus cylinder heads. Once you put camshaft, well, a short block can have a camshaft in it depending on the style of engine, but once you put cylinder heads on it, and it's more kind of assembled that way, that is classified as a long block. So for today, we're going to get this thing, lifters in it, camshaft in it, and have it as an assembled short block. While I'm here, it's upside down. I'm going to put the oil pump on and the pickup tube, and that will finish off the bottom side here. Alright, oil pump, pickup tube are on, torque down. Something to be mindful of, and sorry I didn't get it on camera. The gasket for the oil pump to the block and the gasket for the oil pump to the pickup tube, they're very, very close to being the same. But when you set them side by side, you will notice the one that goes onto the block has a slightly larger bolt spacing. So find the two gaskets that look almost identical, set them over top of each other, and you will realize fairly quickly that one is slightly larger. That one's going to go on your oil pump, and the other one's going to go on your pickup tube. When you clean the screen in the pickup, I had this sitting in the parts washer for 2 days. And then I put a brush inside the screen, brushed it out the best I could, and then I actually started flushing through the end of the pickup tube, out through, and you'd be amazed at how much junk came out here. I then put the actual wand of the parts washer in here, and then repeated the process back and forth multiple times. So just keep that in mind. Spend extra time cleaning that, because if that is clogged at all, that is going to restrict flow, which is going to be feeding oil or lack thereof to all your new bearings and going to cause problems. So another sign that this engine probably didn't have frequent oil changes. That was really plugged up. There was a chunk that I pulled out of there that was probably that long and 1/4 inch wide, and it was solid. It looked like a worm. So just be very mindful of that. Take your time, clean things properly. It will pay off in the end. Camshaft and lifters time. We've got our camshaft that's going in. Got some assembly lube on that. We'll smear that around before we install it. Got the old camshaft and lifters here. I am not able to reuse them because this thing sat so long and got rust. We've got rust on those roller tips. That's just going to mess things up. On this cam, again, look at that top lobe. Like, it's just completely rotted. That's just going to cause problems. You could polish it if you wanted. Not worth it. It's a stock cam. Even if it was an aftermarket cam, the chances are it's pitted underneath there. You're going to have stuff that might be compromised, debris that might come off, go through your engine, score your bearings, and that crankshaft you freshly polished, and just cause damage. Do yourself a favor, spend a little bit of money, go out, find yourself a good, clean, used cam. Roller cams don't tend to wear too much, so as long as it's good and clean, you'll be all right. Inspect it for scratches and scores. If it looks good, chances are you'll be just fine. You can find yourself the almighty B cam or something along those lines, or if you just want to go for the stock rebuild like I am, go find a stock cam. They're cheap or free. Clean it up a little bit with the parts washer, give it a rinse down, and you're good to go. We've got our lifters. They've been soaking in oil overnight. Typically, you're only going to need 20 minutes, half an hour. I wipe them all down and then soak them in oil. And we've got, actually maybe I will show you on the old ones since they're not all coated in oil. We've got this little bleed hole here. And doing some research, there's different ways of thinking on installation. And when I had them in the oil, what you could see is I had the bleed hole facing up, and when they get oil in there, it displaces the air. You get little air bubbles. With these in the install in the valley, people say it doesn't matter which way it's coming in because the oil is going side to side. So it doesn't matter if it's oil hole up or oil hole down. A lot of people do like the idea of the oil hole being up because gravity being helping displace the air, just like it was in the oil bath when it was soaking there, so it just helps them prime a lot easier and reduces lifter noise. I'm of the same mindset of that, so that's what I'm going to do. We're going to coat the rest of this camshaft in the assembly lube. I've already checked my cam bearings. Those bearings I showed you that came out of the connecting rods and the crankshaft with all the coloring in them and down to the copper, you're going to see the same kind of thing in your cam bearings. So look through, check them, see if there's any scoring, any discoloration. You can see if it's worn through a layer. If not, you don't have the special tools to do them, chances are you'll be all right. If you do have the special tools or have a friend that does, then go ahead and replace them. But if not, a lot of the time you can get away with reusing them. You'll be perfectly fine. All right, so we're just going to go and spread that assembly lube around the camshaft. Make sure it's good and evenly coated. And then we've got our special tool being the long bolt for the handle. We're going to go through and just gently install. It's nice to have the long bolt the further you get the camshaft in so that you can actually tilt the end of the camshaft up to get it through the bearings. You can kind of see it as it goes through a little bit in the valley holes, but not a whole lot there. That one went nice and easy. Give that a little spin, spread some of that assembly lube around, pull that bolt out, get our timing chain set up on here, and then we're going to get some lifters in, the dog bones and the spider. We'll be finished up for today. Before we install our timing chain and gears, we have to install our cam retainer plate. And this is fairly straightforward. Look at the back of it. It says back, bottom. And if you line it up, it covers the oil feed hole, which then allows oil to come up to the front side there. Pretty straightforward. Bolts go in, and these ones get torqued down to 9 to 12 foot-pounds. So we will torque them up. And then we will go ahead and get our timing gears on. Typically what I find for the lower one is line up the keyway at 12 o'clock. And these have little dots on them anyways, which you're going to line up your timing marks. And sure enough, this set goes on great like that. And then we have our Made in USA. And if we slip this on, line it up, there is the dowel pin on the cam. We're going to spin this around, line our timing marks up, and then when we go to grab our chain, which I have oiled as well, and things should line up pretty good here. Sometimes you may need to pull the crankshaft gear off a little bit so that the gears are actually going on square with each other. And then we may also need to just kind of rotate things around a little bit just to get them lined up on the cam, since we've got our dowel pin in there. Get that knocked back. There we are. So you can see now our dots are off, but if we rotate all the way around, come back, we are actually one tooth off. So that's why you're always going to check. So take it apart again, rotate this one more tooth on the cam, and then, well, basically we're going to pull it off of the cam. I should have grabbed a screwdriver, conveniently located here. Might need a couple tools just to slip it off. This gets tight real quick apparently. There we are. And we are going to want to go one tooth clockwise on the chain on the crank. And then we will go and do all of that again, and then check our timing marks again. You can also pull the cam gear off and just grab a hold of the dowel and rotate the cam a little bit to try and get things lined up with the hole in the cam gear. Get them slid back on there. There we are. And we will do our rotate around, line things back up, and see where we sit again. There we are, spot on. Now we're going to install our cam gear retaining bolt and oil slinger, and this gets torqued to, I believe, 40 to 45 foot-pounds. All right, time for lifters. So we got the last 8 of our lifters to install here. And as I said earlier, we're just going to put the oil feed hole up. The major thing you have to worry about with these is actually having the roller this way, because if you're going sideways, that's going to be a real bad day. That's not going to roll on the camshaft properly, and you're just going to have an absolute disaster. So these are all coated in oil. They've been soaking in oil, which will ensure that they're not dry on startup. They are then pre-lubed inside, and they've also got oil on the outside, which helps them drop down into the bores. Then we've got our dog bones, which links the two of them together to keep them from rotating on the lobes of the camshaft. They are very simple to install, and you've got up. So pretty hard to mess that one up, or at least I hope it is. And then last, we've got our spider, and all it does is holds down those dog bones. You've got 2 bolts that go down into the lifter valley here. And looking through my manual, I was looking for torque spec on these, and I actually wasn't able to find it. So through some check over, these are going to go to 12 foot-pounds, as they are the same diameter bolt as the camshaft retainer plate. And we don't want to over torque them because they are a small bolt, and that's a recipe for disaster if you're going to snap those off. So we'll just simply bring them up to that 12, as I mentioned. And there we have it. 302 Mustang short block finally assembled. I know this video is probably way longer than I originally anticipated it to be. There's a lot of information here. I wanted to try and give you guys as much detail as I could. If you stuck around to the end of the video, thank you very, very much. I truly, truly appreciate it. If this video can help just one of you, then it was totally worth doing. I'm already going through the process of building this engine, so I figured it worth putting out the information for y'all so that you've got it at hand when you're gonna go out into the garage and do it yourself. If you feel that you would like to support the channel, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to videos. I do have t-shirts still with the same Notorious Autosports logo. Feel free to email me at notoriousautosports@gmail.com. They are $25, and I do have multiple sizes left, but we are limited in some of the sizes, so please let me know. I would be happy to send one of those out to you. Again, thank you for watching, and don't forget, we got a whole lot more coming because we still got the top end of this engine to do. So we'll catch you guys next time.